Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Me. Welcome to my channel. I hate rock music. Here. And today I want to talk about another great lost album or a great lost opportunity, depending on how you look at it. And that's the idea that Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter could have made one of the greatest albums in rock. And there's a lot of reasons to suggest that. Of course, the fact is that Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter had played together many times, although Johnny Winter said that it was really hard to get to know Jimi Hendrix, that he was always playing his guitar and pretty much just wanted to talk about music, and it was kind of hard to get close to, but it was really nice. And also, we've read in interviews with Johnny Winter that he got together with Jimi Hendrix at different points, and Jimmy was really interested in slide and bottleneck. And of course, it's notable that Jimi Hendrix doesn't do any slide or bottleneck playing, as far as I know, on any of his records. And Johnny Winter said he showed him how it was done, and he said that you really couldn't teach really couldn't teach Jimi Hendrix anything. He was so good. So he said it was a matter of just showing him the technique, and then perhaps Jimmy would have explored that more had he lived. But there's a lot of great information about Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix playing together. One thing you have to dismiss right away is this live show out there that supposedly drunk Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter playing together. And Johnny Winter says it's simply not him. He never met Jim Morrison, so we can dismiss that right away. And then one of the more intriguing aspects of this whole idea too is that Hendrix State finally released a Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter collaboration, Things I Used to Do, and it's really incredible. They play really well together, and it makes total sense. And that's a big part of my discussion. I kind of went into a deep dive on Johnny Winter recently, and I really started getting the feeling that there was a lot more connection and kinship between them, particularly as players, than I really thought about before. And part of that was listening to the album Second Winter. And there's a couple of tracks on there, Memory Pain and A Good Love, that showed me that Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter had a lot of commonalities. The fact that they're both really stunning rhythm players, really stunning lead players, and that they could go in and out of playing lead and playing rhythm effortlessly. And so they both share that. And then on the Second Winter album, the fact that Johnny Winter was using a wah-wah, which we don't necessarily hear him playing a lot. And so the fact that he was using a wah-wah on that album, it makes the comparisons between Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix even more profound. And in fact, the closer I listened, I noticed that a lot of rhythmic things and a lot of bends and articulations that Johnny Winter was doing were things I was used to hearing from Jimi Hendrix. And so I find them to be really comparable players in a lot of respects, even though they're worlds apart. Perhaps if Johnny Winter had used raging distortion and played at huge volumes and used a lot of feedback, there perhaps wouldn't be as big a difference between them as we see. And of course, the other reason why they're compatible is because both Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter were just consummate blues players, and so that background alone would have made them very compatible. They're both deep blues players with staggering technical ability, and Johnny Winter commented on the fact that Jimi Hendrix could play anything like T-Bone Walker or any Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, and a lot of the big blues players. He kind of mastered all that different kinds of playing. And I also think that they could have made a great record together. And I think about that because we only have a couple examples of Jimi Hendrix playing acoustic blues. We have a lot of examples of Johnny Winter playing acoustic blues. So any album they made together could have really explored some acoustic blues. And the other thing is that Johnny Winter has proved that he could really integrate with another guitar player. He sits in with the Allman Brothers at the Atlanta Pop Festival show, and he and Dwayne Allman, Dickie Betts sound great together. And also the fact that Johnny Winter played in his band Johnny Winter and with Rick Derringer, and amply demonstrated that he didn't necessarily have to carry the whole show, that he could work with another guitar player and work tastefully with them and interact with them. And so because of Hendrix's and Johnny Winter's backgrounds, I could see them really integrating their playing really well. Another good example of that is listening to Derek and the Dominoes with Dwayne Allman and Eric Clapton together. They really complemented each other a lot. And I think Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter could have done that had they made a studio album. And so I imagine a studio album with some great electric blues tunes and some great acoustic blues tunes, and a full production of an album with Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix would have been truly epic. And I just think it could really work. Then I also think about Johnny Winter's singing and Jimi Hendrix's singing. I thought about it some more and listened, and I think their voices would really complement each other well. And when I think of the singing that Johnny Winter did on the Johnny Winter and album, quite different from a lot of his blues howling. He sang beautifully on that record. No Time to Live is just incredible, and I think that the potentiality of them harmonizing or trading vocals could have really worked really well, and that's important for me to analyze both players and really be honest about whether they would work together well. And I think the track Things I Used to Do that has been released shows full well that Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter could have complemented each other well, and had they made a studio record together, I think it could have been a truly great thing. And there is a bunch of recordings with Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix. Apparently, according to Johnny Winter, they played for about 2 or 3 hours. They recorded at the Record Plant in 1969, and the band was Jimi Hendrix, Johnny Winter, Stephen Stills, Dallas Taylor, and some suspect Billy Cox playing bass. And so they played 2 or 3 hours. They came up with Things I Used to Do, and there's also some jams with Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix and Buddy Miles. And also there's a couple things posted on YouTube. There's a unknown instrumental jam with Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter. There's another collaboration called Ships Passing in the Night. And I'll post these all below so you can check them out. But there's also a 36-minute tape from those sessions posted on YouTube, which I'll post below. And that sounds pretty rough, and it doesn't seem like there's workable material. But that said, and I'll also post this below, there's an interesting article about Johnny Winter asking if anybody has the tapes out there of them playing together, because he said there's a full album's worth of good material. And so that really whets my appetite. If they played for 2 or 3 hours, it's fairly likely there's 30 or 40 minutes of really usable material. And that version of Things I Used to Do is a tantalizing glimpse about how their playing would have gelled together. And the other thing that kind of interested me when I was listening to Johnny Winter, particularly the second Winter album, is there's a couple songs, and I'll post those below too, as I mentioned earlier, Memory Pain and A Good Love, really show me that Johnny Winter definitely was kind of doing some things that were very similar to Jimi Hendrix, and particularly the use of wah. And there's also a track on there where there's congas, which of course we know Jimi Hendrix liked to add congas to some of the material he did. And there's a one other song on the album too, an outtake, Early in the Morning, that has organ and has Edgar Winter on it. And I listened to that tune, and I could really hear Jimi Hendrix doing that in the same way that I could hear Jimi Hendrix when I listened to Johnny Winter and that version of Time to Live, No Time to Live, written by Stevie Winwood. I can really picture Jimi Hendrix singing that song and doing a version of that song. But the song Early in the Morning, and I'll post this below, and you can see all the comparisons I'm talking about. Um, it really has some Hendrix kind of aspects to it. The guitar overdubs, um, Johnny Winter's playing, and then Edgar Winter almost sounds like Buddy Miles singing background vocals. And there's also some background vocals on there that sound like the Ghetto Fighters that Jimi Hendrix used on Cry of Love. So when I listened to that particular song, it really sparked my imagination of how Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter would have worked in the studio. And of course, they had a whole plethora of musicians they could work with because, as we've talked about, Stephen Stills and Dallas Taylor and Billy Cox and Buddy Miles and even Stevie Winwood. There's a whole bunch of people that could have played on a studio record with Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix. And I also put links below to a version of Red House that Johnny Winter did and a version of Hey Joe that Johnny Winter did back to back with Jimi Hendrix versions of those same two songs to see the comparison. And there's a lot of ways that they can be compared because, of course, Jimi Hendrix is a staggering player and Johnny Winter is a staggering player, and they both have really cool vocal styles. And it's really great to hear those versions back to back and do a comparison. But I think the bottom line for me is just the more I've listened to Johnny Winter, particularly Second Winter, and think about Jimi Hendrix and compare their playing, and compare their choices, compare their articulations, compare their use of wah-wah, and then think about the fact that Johnny Winter was so sensitive a player, working with another incredible guitar player, Rick Derringer and Johnny Winter and now my imagination runs wild thinking about the fact that Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter could have easily gotten together and made a truly incredible blues rock album. And it's sad that, like so many other projects Jimi Hendrix was looking forward to in 1970 and 71 and 72, had he lived a couple more years, it's hard to say what he would have done. It seemed like he liked, as Johnny Winter pointed out, Jimi Hendrix was everywhere in the clubs. And Johnny Winter watched Jimi Hendrix jam on many occasions at all the New York clubs. And Jimi Hendrix was ready to play with anybody. And I think this bond that Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix had, exemplified by the fact that the day after Jimi Hendrix died, Johnny Winter recorded a tribute single that is a non-LP song called 21st Century Man. It's just a very poignant tribute to Jimi Hendrix, so he definitely felt the loss. But it's great that we have examples of those two playing together. And unfortunately, like a lot of things that I talk about in these videos, it just whets my appetites to the loss we have that, as I said repeatedly, the idea of Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix getting together and making a blues rock album together, it just is a loss I can barely cope with, because now that I've really digested the whole idea, I'm sure it could have happened, and I'm sure it would have been amazing. So there you have it. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.